Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're all here. I would like to call the meeting to order and start with the salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. For the 12 of us and probably most of the audience, we have a pretty easy week. I think we're only going to be together every day, every night and every day. So we have quite a busy week. Tonight's our regular monthly meeting. Tomorrow night is our public hearing that begins at 7 p.m. With that, I will call item 3, routine applications, and I will call our clerk.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move 2 items, CC1 conservation for $50,000, an additional appropriation relating to the Byron River Gauge, FD1 Fire Department for $203,375, an additional appropriation related to Hurricane Sandy costs.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Pellegrino. Discussion? I'll make one comment. I actually took this item, and I'm sorry to the Budget Committee, but I actually took this item from non-routine and made it routine. I think we've met with several departments on Hurricane Sandy and all the forms that have been submitted for the reimbursement to FEMA and the insurance company, and I just didn't think the fire department needed another night out. I think we're all pretty clear on that.
I'll just make one comment. For the record, the Budget Committee did take up both items and approved both of them 4-0.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. And we are 12-0-0. At this time, I would move to our non-routine applications, and I would call on Mr. Pellegrino for ED5.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move ED5. This is a request for an additional appropriation of $1,402,000 made on behalf of the Board of Education.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Finger. Committee report, Mr. Pellegrino.
Mr. Chairman, the Budget Committee met with Superintendent of Schools, Dr. McCursey, the Chief of Police, Mr. Heavey, the Managing Director of Operations for the Board of Education, Mr. Branyan, and the Director of School Safety, Mr. Thomas Bobkowski. Also in attendance were our First Selectman, Mr. Tessie, and the Chairman of the Board, Ms. Moriarty. Dr. McCursey reported that the proposal before us was developed with input from the First Selectman and Chief Heavey in consultation with the Board of Education, and in his opinion was a thoughtful and prudent approach to improving the safety and security of our public schools. The approach being taken consists of 4 components: facility enhancements, human resources, procedures and practices, and training. 3 of those components are already underway, and there will be no additional request for funding forthcoming. Facility enhancements, however, is the component that requires the additional funding of $1.4 million. The initiatives will be as follows. 1, intercom upgrades for $45,015, key watcher system for $87,000, locking devices for $348,150, closed caption TV recorders and cameras for $219,365, DSX card readers for $60,605, shades $382,500, security window film $42,750, Be Safe floor plan mapping $18,681, and a 16% contingency for $197,643. Collectively, these actions will toughen the exterior facility from unwanted access and limit internal and visual access to classrooms and other locations of students and staff. Dr. McCursey stressed the importance of these steps to slowing down an unwanted visitor. Mr. Branyan pointed out that funding was required now so that the RFP process could commence and contracts signed as soon as the RTM approves the request. Work would begin immediately, and a significant portion of it is expected to be completed by June 30th. The balance is expected to be completed before school begins in late summer. Mr. Branyan also pointed out that there was no overlap or duplication of projects with the current capital proposal before us in the fiscal year 13-14 recommended budget. The Budget Committee reviewed each component of the facility enhancement program and was comfortable that appropriate steps were being taken to restrict unwanted access and slow down any unwanted visitor. The committee voted 4-0 in support of the Board of Ed's request.
Discussion on the item? As you all know, this was an item that the Board of Ed had decided whether it was going to be rolled into the budget or on an interim basis. The interim basis does give them 1 month, obviously. That's why it's on the agenda before you tonight ahead of time, because the Board of Ed obviously does a majority of their capital work as soon as the schools are out. So if we did it in June, they would be basically, be a month behind the budget process. So you have it tonight. It'll still have to go to the RTM. Further discussion? Ms. Tarkington?
I will make a comment on that. Clearly I supported that, and I think safety and security is very important. But by accelerating this for, a month and a half, even perhaps we could have given A&E ahead of time, it means that this will not be financed and spread over 7 years in terms of the cost to the town, but rather taken as a cash item in this year's budget. So items such as this is, $1.4 million, do make it more difficult in terms of our planning and anticipating the financing costs of the town. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. Further discussion? Mr. Goldrick.
Mr. Chairman, I have been troubled by all of the video surveillance cameras we've put in our schools. This plan calls for 81 cameras to be installed in most of them in elementary schools. And, I am troubled by how this, what sort of a learning environment that creates. But in the post-Newtown environment, I would note that the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission's report came out today, and as recommendation number 26 was that we have, that Connecticut schools have video surveillance cameras that are IP capable. So in light of that, it is an authoritative commission. They put in a lot of work on that, so I will withdraw my objections. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0-0. Mr. Pellegrino, NW9.
NW9 is a request from Nathaniel Witherall for an additional appropriation of $643,000 for personnel, supplies, and materials.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Committee report. Mr. Pellegrino.
Nathaniel Witherall has requested an additional appropriation to meet its operating needs for the current fiscal year. Of the amount requested, $241,000 is going towards meeting town-allocated service charges, which were not anticipated at the level subsequently experienced when Nathaniel Witherall submitted his budget last year. $195,000 is for personnel services, $84,000 is for maintenance, and $61,000 is for medical supplies. The balance is for various other items. This request is not entirely new to the Budget Committee. We became aware some time ago that the delay in starting Project Renew was going to lead to a funding gap between the operating plan submitted and the facts on the ground as they evolved. In short, the operating plan submitted assumed fewer patients earlier in the process and thereby lower expenses. What has happened with the delay in Project Renew is the expenses have not been lowered as early as anticipated, and a corresponding increase in revenues has not been sufficient to offset the higher expenses. Those facts, along with the increase in the town overhead, have led to this request for additional funding. The committee voted 4-0 to support this request.
Thank you. Discussion? 12-0-0.
Okay.
Next, PR6.
Mr. Chairman, PR6 is before us this evening. It's from the Parks and Recreation Department. It is calling for the release of conditions for $1,777,252. I didn't say that right. $1,777,252.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Committee report, please.
Okay. Let me just say at the outset, we did not vote on this at the committee, but I do have a committee report. The committee moved to place this item on the agenda and thereby had the opportunity to listen to the Director of Parks and Recreation, Joe Siciliano, and Assistant Director, Tom Greco, along with independent consultant Devin Santa from Roberge Associates, who presented the latest news regarding the costs associated with rebuilding the pier at Island Beach. The committee had a number of questions, of which Mr. Siciliano was able to address. The key questions were pertaining to the reimbursement of costs associated with a higher estimate for rebuilding the pier to current standards. Specifically, the committee wanted to know if the additional costs would be reimbursed by either insurance or FEMA, and if, in any way, a change in the design to meet higher standards would prejudice reimbursement. I believe since that meeting, there was an informal discussion that took place this past Friday. I believe those questions have been addressed, and maybe, Joe, you would like to come up for a moment and specify to the entire board our concerns, address our concerns on reimbursement, either insurance or FEMA.
There were two meetings actually held. I attended the audit committee meeting. Mr. Norton may offer some information, and we talked about reimbursement and insurance. And on Friday in my office, in the presence of Bill Finger, Leslie Tarkington, Ron Lally from our claims coordinator, Joan Sullivan from purchasing, and Dustin Anderson from the Selectman's office, who's handling the FEMA claims. We had a conversation to clearly address the principal two questions: reimbursement from insurance and reimbursement from FEMA. I think both Leslie and Bill were both satisfied with what they heard. Maybe they'd like to report on it, but we can update and we already have updated our insurance claim to our insurance company with the new estimates. We've also done that for FEMA. Both Ron and Dustin were relatively positive that the new information would be, again, it is an open claim, and that the new information would be in consideration for reimbursement at both the insurance and from FEMA. We will continue to update those files and make sure that we coordinate with the insurance company and with FEMA to get the best return that we can.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I have no objection to releasing this condition. I'm appreciative that Joe took the time to address those concerns of the committee.
Okay. Mr. Finger, Ms. Tarkington, anything on this?
I would just add, one of the concerns expressed at the Budget Committee meeting was the initial claim was put in to FEMA and our insurance carrier at $1.3 million, and the question was, now that we have bids at roughly $1.8 million or $1.7 million, prejudiced by that additional $470,000 cost. And both Mr. Anderson and Mr. Lally indicated that with the actual bids at the $1.7 million or $1.777 million, it's as if the $1.3 million never existed. So the number that insurance carrier and FEMA are going to be focusing on is not the previous $1.3 million, but the $1.7 million, and therefore is not going to jeopardize any reimbursement potentials for us.
Any other discussion, questions? Thank you, Joe. All those in favor? Release of, opposed? Abstaining? 12-0-0. That's on that release of condition. Okay. With that, we'll move down into our package into our assessor's report. And I believe our assessor is not with us tonight, correct? Well, that is good. That is good. We do have our assessor's report, though, and I think Mr. Shipman is. Good evening. Good to see you. Good to see you. If there are any questions, anybody have any questions on that? If not, I will accept the motion to accept.
I'll move that we accept this report, the assessor's report, please.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Thank you. Bob, really appreciate it. Always enjoy your support. Moving on. Controller's report. Mr. Menarski.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, the BET members. You have a copy of the Controller's report. highlighted by the annual budget process, which consumes a lot of the finance department's time. And I'd like to, before I open up to any questions, the list of RFPs is growing. 5 of them I've issued, we're working on currently, and I've been invited by the Human Resources Department to participate in the healthcare broker RFP as part of the evaluation team, and the HCMS, also known as the Human Resources Capital Management System. So we're quite active. One of the benefits of doing all these at once, we don't have to worry about them for the next 5 years.
So, if I may, the healthcare broker, our broker of record right now is,
Ovation Benefits.
and that, when does our agreement with Ovation come to an end?
I don't know if we don't have a firm contract with Ovation, do we? It would be this year, correct?
We have a contract.
It would lapse June 30th.
So when
June
you,
30th.
so when we assign our healthcare broker, that gives them the right to bid on behalf of the town, and we're starting that process over the summer, right?
That, and also to include consultant services. For example, the Affordable Care Act, you need a broker with consultant services more than you ever have now with what's going on with the healthcare industry. So this is a combination of not only a broker services, this RFP will get us someone who can provide consultant services also.
Okay. So this is just going out right now? You don't have any? It's already going out, but you don't have any responses back on that or anything, do you?
Yes, it's in the report. We had 9 responses. We've eliminated 3. We're interviewing 6 of them. Friday's the 5th. April 3rd and 4th, we're going to interview 3 in one morning and 3 in the other morning. We're down to 6. And one of the things is, one of the objects here is to get a broker in place because, as you all know, through the budget process, the healthcare contract lapses December 31st. So it's important that we get somebody on board as quick as possible.
Okay. So I would imagine our HR committee is probably going to want to have an update on that as we go forward on those items, because one of the things is when we get into the healthcare things, I'm thinking we're going to want some representation on that, because that's probably, I did it last time with one of our members where we were looking at that, and that was significant.
I think, just to add, one of the things we might be looking at is, as you recall, Michael, some of the other members weren't here 8 or 9 years ago. We were self-insured at one point, and we moved away from that to a fully insured program. We will be looking at fully insured versus self-insured in this area.
For those that don't know, we actually looked at that a couple times, and it's a valuable look. You've heard some of the run experience that we've had on healthcare, so I know Peter's watching that and Roland's watching that very closely, because even if we went self-insured, we would have a fixed cost for management of it to a third party. But it is something that we really have to have as normal fashion, have to have all of our options on the table. Wasn't me.
Mark wants to say something.
It's this microphone, I'm convinced. If I may, I just have a question for Pete. A lot of the RFPs, you seem to be getting 7, 8, 9, 10 responses. Is that encouraging? Are we hopeful that that'll mean competitive bidding?
Usually, you're going to get the same firms bidding all the time, so I wouldn't say it's either encouraging or discouraging. If we only got 1 or 2, it would be discouraging, but this is a healthy number. If you start to get 14, 15, 16, your work is really cut out for you, because you're going to have to really limit it to who was out there, who was the best. But I would say it's acceptable. It's not discouraging. Good numbers, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty good.
Anything else to the controller's report? Ms. Tarkington?
Yes. Yes. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment on Pete's section on the annual budget process. He comments on the numerous analytical and informational reports he provides to the BET and the Budget Committee members. And I just want to, thank Pete and Roland and Maureen and say, not only do they provide everything that we ask for, but they anticipate our needs and provide tremendous support during the budget process.
Thank you. With that, are you bringing a timer tomorrow night?
3-minute rule?
I have it right there.
I have hourglass.
This board has experience with time conversations as of late, and we've quickly found out how we go around that, so we won't have that tomorrow night. Okay, all those in favor of the controller's report?
Move to accept first.
I'm sorry, I would entertain a motion that we move and accept the controller's report.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. That leads us right into item 6, which is the treasurer's report.
Move to accept, Mr. Chairman.
I have a motion to moved and seconded for the treasurer's report. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. I wish the numbers were bigger so I could read it.
You don't want to read them.
I have to get a magnifying glass at home for that. Okay. BET Standing Committee reports. I don't think I have any reports on that. Liaisons, I'm also good. I would mention real quick on liaison reports for fire and police. I'd like to thank Mr. Finger and Mr. Pellegrino. I think as liaisons, Bill and I do public safety, and it gave us a chance to revisit with the police chief on some of the happenings in the budget process, and I think it helped and clarified a lot of different information and what was going forward, and I really appreciate all your time on that. And Joe, thank you for your help there also. Special projects teams, Central Firehouse. That's coming along. I would expect we're probably going to start hearing more and more on that as that progresses. MISA, I've asked Ms. Tarkington to postpone that because we have an item on the agenda for that. I don't think I have anything else there. Okay, that would bring us to new business. Review and approval of PIMCO Total Return Fund. I would call, let's see, how do I want to do this? I'll call on Mr. Bedrosian first. And then I think the law committee reviewed this, so I would call Mr. Raymer next. But Mr. Bedrosian, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. So under Section 208 of the town charter, the retirement board has asked us, the BT, to review an investment in the PIMCO Total Return Fund. But by way of background, for the group, PIMCO is an asset management firm founded back in the 1970s. It's been very successful. It manages about $1.8 trillion with a T, $trillion of capital for investors worldwide, and it is particularly in this area, which is fixed income, one of the world's most respected asset managers. The PIMCO Total Return Fund focuses primarily on investment grade fixed income, but it also does have the ability to invest a small portion, approximately 10% or up to 10% in high yield instruments, as well as up to 15% in emerging market securities. I would like to, for the group, highlight that this is a mutual fund product that is traded daily and liquid, very different from, Mr. Chairman, many of the other products that we've been discussing in past meetings, which were illiquid, decade-long private equity instruments. This is a security that can be traded in and out of on a daily basis. Last week, the Investment Advisory Committee did review and discuss the fund, but we did not actually come to a vote on it. However, I would like to move that the BET approve the contract with the PIMCO Total Return Fund. Put that on the table.
Okay.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Norton. Okay. Mr. Raymer.
The Law Committee looked at this last Wednesday, the 13th. We reviewed it with Eugene McLaughlin, Assistant Town Attorney. We found with his advice and counsel, we found the paperwork to be in legal order. We had proposed 5 conditions. Let me speak to them because many of them have been resolved in the succeeding time and others of them are worthy of some explanation. The 5 conditions were as follows. First, at the time of our review, the assistant town attorney was indicating to us that he had requested to see a recommendation of the investment from NEPC, our pension advisor, and at that point had not seen it. We proposed that as a condition. Attached to your materials tonight is a copy of the letter of recommendation of NEPC. It happens to be dated the 13th. I have no idea if that letter was available at the time that we met or if it became available only later the same day. It's dated the same day as the day on which we met. But in any event, I understand from the assistant town attorney that that this condition has been satisfied to his satisfaction, and therefore I believe it was satisfied to the committee's satisfaction. Secondly, we were understanding, I believe incorrectly, from the assistant town attorney that the retirement board had not yet actually reviewed and approved it, and we viewed it as being inappropriate that we as a committee are reviewing it, or indeed that the BET as a whole are being asked to approve something which the retirement board itself had not yet reviewed and approved and indicated that they wanted to invest in. I later was included in a circulated email from our controller indicating that he went back and reviewed through the minutes, and it was plain to him from the minutes that in fact that was misinformation, that the retirement board had indeed reviewed and approved and was requesting this investment. So I think our condition of that was simply misplaced. There are 3 remaining conditions. One was that we noted that the investment as being proposed to us had no expression to us of what the dollar amount was. We don't view it as being the province of the law committee to be dictating what the dollar figure is, but we did conclude that it is appropriate for the law committee to concern itself with a proposed investment in which no dollar limit is expressed at all. We understood from the town attorney that to the best of his understanding, he thought the investment was expected to be $10.3 million. And so we imposed as a condition that there should be an expressed ceiling, and the ceiling as we understood it, not our number, but their number, was $10.3 million. Similarly, there was no limitation on time investment. This was a little less clear to us, but nevertheless it was our conclusion that on an investment that the BET is being asked to approve, that there should be, since this was a rolling investment, so to speak, it's an investment that you could cash into or out of on a daily basis at your whim and caprice. We thought that there should be some limitation of time that the BET expresses when it gives approval of this investment. And the final was that the town attorney indicated to us that there may have been a desire on behalf of the retirement board to be investing in other PIMCO funds, but he indicated to us that the only paperwork that he in fact had reviewed was the PIMCO Total Return Fund. He didn't necessarily assume that the paperwork on other of the PIMCO funds would be materially different, but nevertheless his review was limited to that particular fund, and accordingly we viewed that it was appropriate for us to say that the approval that we were recommending, the finding that we were recommending of things being in legal order related to the paperwork which was in fact reviewed, which means the paperwork for the PIMCO Total Return Fund.
So, if I may, so your vote was 2-0 on?
2-0 to find the paperwork for this investment to be in legal order with, at the time, those 5 conditions. At least 2 of those conditions have since been satisfied.
Okay, so item number 1 has been satisfied.
Yes, number one, I mean, different people's lists may be different items. Let me be clear. The recommendation letter from NEPC has in fact been received and is in fact attached to our materials tonight.
And the other item is?
That the retirement board review and approve the investment before we're being asked to review and approve it, and that apparently took place. The information that we were relying on appears to have been misinformation.
So on my list, it's item 1 and 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, discussion. Mr. Chadwick, good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
I've seen a lot of communication over this.
Yes,
and,
we all
and we've
have.
had this over the last several items on this. And let's start out. Is there anything that you're hearing from our reports that is there an issue? I'm trying to come to a resolution. We have a series of symptoms, and I would say the number one is Section 208 of the Charter and its interpretation, and I can work on fixing that as a sidebar. But tonight we have an item before us, and I sense that there's some caution.
Okay, well,
I'm all ears.
Great. The things that I would say are, first of all, as to how much money will go into this fund. The way that PIMCO came about, quite frankly, goes back a few years. We used to have a company called BlackRock that managed a large amount of our fixed income money, and BlackRock totally missed a change in the market from the bond market moving heavily into treasuries while they were staying in mortgage-backed securities, to the point that we'd had enough of that. And so we decided that we would take the money from BlackRock and we spread it out to some managers, but a substantial portion of it went into an index fund at State Street Bank. And State Street has matched the index because that's what it was supposed to do. However, we're in tougher times now, I think, than we have been in recent years as far as fixed income investing is concerned. And while I know there's a huge body of people saying the end is here for bonds, which has so many people on that side of the boat that I'm not so certain it's going to turn out that way. And there's certainly, when you look around the world today, particularly in Europe, the Far East and the United States, with so many economies in dire trouble, the Federal Reserve banks of all those countries are continuing to have a very easy monetary policy, and I think that is going to last for years, not for just a couple of months in here. So that said, I don't have perhaps the same worries about fixed income as other people may have. And also remember that the state of Connecticut requires that you have 30% of your money in fixed income investments. So I guess we could put it all in Treasury bills and walk away, but that's not what we've decided to do. As you know, we've made substantial changes to this portfolio in the last 3 or 4 years, and the returns reflect a much different approach to investing than we had before. So at the moment, there's 29% of the portfolio actually in what everyone might call straight fixed income investments. To the law committee, I would say there is no limit on any of those investments. Nobody is asking us to come back in and have them reviewed at any point in time, nor is there any limit on the investments that we have in the Russell 1000 and the Russell 2000. Many of those are bigger than any of this, and to pick out this one particular fund and say we need to have some limit on it seems rather silly to me. The idea that we have is that, coming back to what Greg said earlier, this is a time when we think that we need some real investment expertise in the bond market. And PEMCO, being the largest bond fund in the world, managed by Bill Gross, who is the guru of the fixed income market, and he in fact runs the fund that we're talking about, and his fund has been outperforming the State Street fund for a while in here, actually quite a while in here. And so what our idea is to take this money that's at State Street, which has actually sort of been there as a place to park our money while we made other investments. Let's move it over and get some better management out of it. At the moment, because we took $10 million out of it last month, at the moment there's about $16 million at State Street. I would use the number 16 million as opposed to 10.3 for what we would probably would do here.
I'm not certain how long it will stay with PEMCO. There are other places to invest money, and as you know, one of the things that we're trying to do and have been doing is to reduce the volatility of the portfolio so that we don't ever go over a cliff again the way we did back in the mid-2000, 2007, 8, and 9. And we've been doing that by putting them into various bond funds, which you don't perhaps think of here, but if you were to turn over, I have a page here, you don't, but if you were to turn over the page and look at the private investments we have, many of them have bond portions in them already. And one in particular, which was one of the first investments we ever made, is a mezzanine fund managed by Welch Carson. And there's a place where we could easily, that fund is coming to the end of its life, it's a replacement, and we could easily take some of this $16 million and actually have been talking in EPC about some other fund manager to replace that fund. And there are new ideas in the fixed income arena as well coming along. So I don't know, honestly, how long the money will stay with PEMCO. I don't want to say it's going to disappear and that we won't add more money to it. All I'm saying is that I think we'll get a better return from this particular manager with this particular fund than we will just leaving it sitting in an index fund in Boston, Massachusetts.
Thank you. Mr. Pellegrino?
Okay. Hi, John.
Hey, Joe.
Let me just share, I'm going to share some comments, really just to be more on the record than anything. First, I have absolutely no question about PIMCO as a party to do business with. In fact, I was a liaison for the 2 years prior to last year, worked with you and the retirement board and encouraged us to work with PIMCO. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. Structurally, though, my concern goes to institutional issues, specifically that you, as a retirement board, can make a decision back in November, but it's now March before we're actually acting upon it. And in the world of investments today, we all know that that's a lifetime. So I'm not being critical. I'm saying I'm trying to encourage and lay the groundwork for the retirement board to keep trying to address this institutional lag that we seem to have. My own feeling about this particular fund, I would much rather that we were opining on or giving an approval to, as I read Section 208, to just doing business with PIMCO. To me, that's very clear, and I think that's the appropriate role for the BET to be playing.
That's how I read Section 208.
Right. I'm very uncomfortable thinking that we're going to put a condition on it of how much money or for how long, because that I view is totally in the purview of you as a trustee along with your other fellow trustees to use your best judgment for dollar amount, timing, whether you're in or out of it. I think if the narrow question before me tonight is, do I approve this or not, I will vote for it. But I want to vote for it and be clear that I think times have changed since last November. I'd be cautious about being this fund. I realize what your alternative is, which is sitting in the aggregate bond fund, which is equally unappealing. So the only thing I can encourage you and the board to do is to find more, I think, privately placed mezzanine funds that will give us a higher return and reduce what I think will be some of the volatility we'll see in the public mutual funds. So I don't know if you want to respond to anything I said, but I welcome it.
I would certainly agree with that. We would like to reduce the volatility and find other funds. I think it's going to be, from my point of view, the responsibility of the BET is to approve PIMCO's contract. This is acceptable to us, and that is your role and your function. That's what I would like to see approved tonight. Whether we buy this fund or not, I don't think that even has to be in your purview.
Let me ask you a question, John, and maybe this really goes to Gene, Gene McLaughlin, our town council. What's the difference between being so specific to a single fund versus looking at these agreements across the board for PIMCO, so that the retirement board would then have the flexibility, once we approve doing business with PIMCO as an institution, you could then pick and choose or move around within the funds on a moment's notice, as opposed to 6 months later.
I would agree with that, and we have that with State Street. What I think Joe has what delayed this investment and has brought us to this stage, in my opinion, is the insurance that the town wants to have if there's something that goes bad with the fund as to who's going to pay those costs. And we have a lot of side letters with other of our investment managers that the town will not be held responsible for that. PIMCO refuses to have that letter. And they got bogged down in the law department over that kind of language with, I don't know how many hours Gene spent going back and forth with PIMCO trying to get them to at least give us something, and that is their rule. Now, as Greg said, there's over $1 trillion here, so it's everybody in the world, including the town of Greenwich, people who are in their own 401k plans have the right to invest in this fund. And I think it's very difficult for the BET to sit up here and say, you know what, the guys who are at least semi-professional and fiduciaries of the town pension plan, we're not going to let them do it. But all you employees out there who have your own pension investments, it's okay for you to go ahead and do it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know where we are on this, because are we voting on, what are we voting on, and/or are we still talking about conditions that are attached to it?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question before we get to that?
Mr. Raymer, then Mr. Norton.
The fact that the Law Committee presented conditions does not, in my view, in any way require or even request that the BET at large adopt the conditions, first of all. The Law Committee is only a process of our reporting to you as to what we find to be in legal order or not. It's difficult for me to speak for other members. I'm catching the infection from Mark to my left. I don't mean to speak for other members of the Law Committee, but I don't pretend to be somebody who has the investment sophistication of John Chadwick, and I'm grateful to be getting the services of John Chadwick, and I am respectful of the advice. It will remain my own view that Section 208 is not a brilliantly drafted thing. As you read Section 208, it seems clear enough to me that it wishes to vest the investment judgment and discretion in an independent board that it calls the Retirement Board. And it doesn't look to the BET to become suddenly the investment advisors, and probably that's a very good thing.
I don't think you want to be the fiduciary.
I don't think I do. I don't think we do. Clearly, however, Section 208, which was certainly not written by the Law Committee or by this particular BET, Section 208 goes on to say that when you get to a point where you wish to entrust funds to a corporate fiduciary, a corporate trustee is the expression that it uses actually, that the selection of that entity requires BET approval. That doesn't seem to me that it's limited to any single fund. It could address PIMCO at large, but that wasn't the way it was presented to us. It also says that the BET has to approve whatever agreement is being entered into. And it was the view of the Law Committee at our meeting on the 13th that the dollar amount was a relevant factor on the agreement. Are you investing $10 million, $16 million, or the entire $300 million, which is entrusted to the Retirement Board? I have my own view on that I think the dollar amount is a relevant thing for us to know. And I don't think it's silly, to use your word. I take umbrage at the word silly. I don't think our concern about that was silly. But nevertheless, there's no obligation of this BET to adopt the conditions that we imposed. I may be of the view that I think a dollar limitation would have been an appropriate thing to have said, but the BET is not obliged to adopt any such thing.
Yes, good evening, John. I'm somewhat confused as to specifically what we are doing. I thought I heard you state that it's the intention of the Retirement Board to substitute PIMCO for the State Street U.S. Aggregate Bond Fund, which in the most recent February 28th shows $26 million. Is that correct?
It shows that, but that's before money was taken out. We took $10 million out of that and gave it to Loomis Sales.
So since the 28th, or since the 1st of this month, you've reduced that by $10 million, so that the balance of 16 plus million
Yes,
is what you intend to replace
Yes.
with PIMCO.
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one comment from my perspective for the group, if I may, as it relates to the time period restriction that was presented by the Law Committee. As a finance professional, someone who's managed third-party capital in the past, as several of us have, I actually think putting what a 5-year time limit on a mutual fund is actually potentially very dangerous, and there could be unintended consequences whereby if that were part of an approval and, say, future BETs never reviewed that, the 5 years came to an end, the Retirement Board would then be forced to sell PIMCO at 5 years and 1 day, and it may be a fine time to do so, but it may be, based on macro or market conditions, a very disadvantageous time to do so. But for that clause, they would be required to do that. And as a result, I think the unintended consequences of putting a time frame on it are risky and unnecessarily risky, and for that to be added as a condition. Just my own views.
Thank you. If I could, I just want to clarify. So your motion is for the BET to approve the agreement with PIMCO Total Return Fund, buying shares as an institutional investor in an open-end management investment company mutual fund. That's what you're asking us to do. That is the motion.
That is the motion. I mean, we should have perhaps come in here and said PIMCO in general. And I don't know how many funds PIMCO has, and it would be a major pain to come back here every time we wanted to change funds. But that said, this investment is the only one that we've looked at from PIMCO. It comes to fill a very specific spot in the portfolio, replacing State Street. And that's what we're here to ask for now.
Okay. Mr. Pellegrino, Mr. Norton.
So, John, again, I'm going to support this. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying I would much rather that when you look at all the time that Gene is putting into this, that we have an overriding agreement with the firm itself so that you have the flexibility to invest in any of their products going forward. And I'm not a lawyer, Lord knows that. But when I read Section 208 and it talks about the retirement board shall be authorized to make arrangements with any bank or trust company, and then it says basically then designated by the Board of Estimate and Taxation, I would have read that as a very general statement of authority, and that it would actually support the concept of just having a larger agreement with PIMCO because we're supporting the fact that we want them to be one of the parties we do business with. I'm just trying to help you. That's where I hope we go in the future, because I think this is a major mistake that this board starts looking at individual mutual funds in this manner. These are publicly traded funds. The world has changed in the last 30, 40 years, and business is just simply not done like this anymore.
Well, we'll let Mr. McLaughlin work on that next. He's run out of things to do.
Oh, I assure you, once we decide what we're voting on and we get a vote on it, I assure you I will have a follow-up to that. Okay. Further discussion, Mr. Norton was next.
Yes, I was going to ask, Mr. Chairman, if we could amend this motion to expand it to PIMCO as an entity. We have Assistant Town Council in attendance tonight, and if we could ask through him whether or not it would be acceptable to amend the motion to remove the language that specifies a particular fund.
I'm Assistant Town Attorney Gene McLaughlin.
Good evening. I would not recommend a blanket approval for PIMCO for the following reasons. The way the charter reads in effect is that every time there's an agreement for the investment of funds by the retirement board, it's subject to approval by the town law department and by your body, the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Now, the way this particular investment is set up is there is an application agreement that the town will enter into. And it looks like a simple agreement, but it says in effect that the town as the investor agrees to be bound by all the provisions of the operative agreements that are stated in the prospectus. And those operative agreements include a trust agreement, an investment advisor agreement with PIMCO. It includes all the provisions in the prospectus for each particular fund. What I have reviewed so far is the prospectus. I've reviewed the trust agreement for all the PIMCO funds, the investment advisor agreement for all the PIMCO funds, but the only thing that I've been able to review so far is the prospectus for this particular fund. If this board were to give blanket approval for all PIMCO funds, I have not had an opportunity and really couldn't say what all the prospectus information is with regard to those other funds. They may have greater risk. They may have more obligations on behalf of the town that I'm not aware of and cannot advise you, and that this board cannot undertake to be bound by. So if you're looking to streamline this, as I get the impression, if I could draw for an example the State Street agreements, we have approved a investment advisor agreement specifically directly with SSGA, which is the investment advisor arm of State Street, and every time that we do another investment with State Street, we do an amendment to that investment advisor agreement to incorporate the new fund. We also review whatever information is provided with regard to that fund. So I'm sympathetic to the desire of the retirement board and this board to streamline this, but I would not be in a position to advocate a blanket approval for all PIMCO funds because we haven't really reviewed all the operative agreements for them. These are very lengthy documents that are contained in the prospectuses for these funds. What you have in the materials that I sent to the law committee of the BET is only a summary. These are very thick documents. They contain operative representations that should be reviewed and that we should review and give advice to this board on before I would recommend that.
Sorry, man.
Mr.
Yes.
Thank you.
Gene, let me ask you this. What is the specific concern or problem you have in terms of what the town is at risk for? Because I'm struggling with that question.
What the town is at risk for?
Right. What's the issue? We put up $10 million in a mutual fund. What is it that the town is looking for that I, as an individual who invests in that fund, is not going to get? Because I don't write up special agreements as I invest in these funds.
Well, the way the charter is set up, in my view of it, is that the retirement board makes a decision as to what fund they want to go into. There is an oversight by this board. If I were to look to the legislative intent of that, it would seem to be that this board, being the board that would have to make up a difference by a tax levy if there was a shortfall.
But let's go right to that issue,
Yes.
because that seems to be the economic issue.
Yes.
What is the shortfall that we would ever have to make up? We're taking a performance risk with every single investment we make.
That's true.
So where am I ever going to incur a liability on the performance risk? Because I'm accepting that right up front. If they don't adhere to delivering a product or service that they've laid out in their prospectus, are they not subject to fraud? Are they not subject to liability? Are they not subject to shareholders' lawsuits?
There's a difference in the level of care or due care that the various trustees and the various types of investments undertake. You run the gamut from State Street, actually in their investment advisor agreement, agreeing to indemnify the town, to other agreements where the trustees are only liable are liable for negligence, to this type of investment where the trustees are only liable for gross negligence, malfeasance, and failure to adhere to the provisions of the agreement. So we're reviewing these standards of care that are incorporated into the agreement and advising this board, as well as the retirement board, what the nature of the risk is under the terms of the agreement. And that, to me, is part of the review that this board makes in terms of the level of care, the risk it's taking legally, the standard of care that's set forth in these agreements. Because if let's say the investment goes wrong, there's a difference between gross negligence standard and a negligence standard. There's a difference when you have a direct agreement with an investment advisor, such as the town has with State Street, as opposed to a large entity, such as PIMCO, where we do not have a direct agreement with the investment advisor. The agreement is strictly with the trustees of PIMCO, of this trust, this mutual fund, with its own and almost alter ego investment advisor. These are risks that the board, in my view, should be advised of based on our review and discussion with the board before, as part of its making its decision to approve an agreement.
Gene,
Yeah.
from where I sit, yeah. Good. I'm glad you're taking this in the right light. There's a range of investment opportunities out there. There's one thing on this end to be sitting with a private fund by Frank and Smith and Larry and Moe and saying, okay, I'm trusting you as investors to do this well, and then find out that we've got a real problem. That's one thing, and I understand that, and that's what we do when we look at these individual privately placed debt, and I encourage that and support that 1,000%. But the other end of the spectrum is all these large mutual fund companies like Vanguard, like Fidelity, like PIMCO, like Loomis Sales, et cetera, that are plain vanilla. It does not, you can read every single prospectus they put out, Gene. They're all the same. The only difference is some of those funds may have leverage in them, some of them don't, and they tell you that. And as investors, the trustees need to be savvy enough to know whether or not they've got leverage in them or not. But other than that, they're all plain vanilla. So I don't see at all the need to be spending 6 months of legal time to look at every single public mutual fund that we could possibly invest in, because that's an incredible amount of waste of our taxpayers' money. What's a much better use of our taxpayers' money is to approve PIMCO, which is one of the, probably the top 5 fund managers in the world, and get on with it so that the retirement board can decide, is this the right mutual fund for them at this point in time, or is this the right mutual fund for them at this point in time, and have the latitude to be between them. And this is not at all disrespectful of the quality of the work you do, because I know it's first class, and I know you're telling me that as an official here, we as a board need to be responsible for understanding the liabilities we're taking on. But it's 2013. I think we all understand the responsibilities we take on by investing in a public mutual fund. Everybody is doing that every day. People that are in our retirement plans and the contribution side are making choices, what mutual funds they want to be in or out every single day. I just disrespect, I personally disrespect, I don't disrespect, and it's not necessarily that I disagree with you, I understand your focus, I'm just saying that there's a range, and on this aspect of the range, we should get on with the simplest question. Do we as a board accept the responsibility of working with PIMCO and assume that they're a responsible fiduciary of people's money at $1.8 trillion? I assume the answer is yes, and I'm willing to vote for working with PIMCO across the board.
That's, if I just
Sure.
comment on that, because I know your concern is time, or one of your concerns is time. As far as the time frame that Chairman John Chadwick talked about, a long time ago, another PIMCO vehicle, as I recall, came up, but there was a different issue with that, and that was they wanted identification from the town. The town chose a different investment at that time, a substitute, where there was not that particular requirement. As far as this particular review is concerned, I think, Mr. Pellegrino, you asked a question before last time I was here, or maybe a time prior, how much time had I spent on this?
Right.
This particular, I want to back to the first of the year, which is when this really got going. There were certain priorities in terms of private advisors, some of the others, private equities. This particular one took about 25 hours, which is not a lot of time considering that we had to start from scratch on the trust agreement and the investment advisor agreement and the prospectus. I would anticipate that if we go another PIMCO product, it would be quicker. A lot of the work's already been done. But I don't think 25 hours is a lot of time. We've moved on this one directly after the last one that was up. So I would just give you that as a background. I know you're concerned about the time.
No, I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that I would say, Gene, is, there's probably 2 to 3 dozen mutual funds that John and his fellow colleagues on that trust board would like to have access to, and you multiply that by 25 hours, we're talking about real time.
I don't know if you have
Okay.
any other questions?
Gene?
Yes.
Let me just say that in a prior life, I have managed many mutual funds. I have started mutual funds. I have been on the boards of multiple mutual funds. Every prospectus, as Mr. Pellegrino has said, is written the same way because nobody has the time to do it. Any other way, you've got a set of lawyers that you've already paid, and they put the language in there. They're not going to reinvent the wheel for you. And I would bet you anything that every PIMCO fund that we look at will have exactly the same language that this fund has. And in that regard, just a blanket approval of PIMCO is a much better idea.
Okay. Boy, I really don't know if I want to get into drafting a change on the floor on this. I don't think we want to do that. I would going to suggest that we don't do that. However, okay, I'm going to say that I don't want to speak for Mr. Bedrosian, but the motion on the floor is to approve the PIMCO Total Return Fund, which consists of buying shares as an institutional investor in an open-ended management investment company mutual fund. That's the item that has been reviewed by the Law Committee and our liaisons. That's been moved. I can't remember if it was seconded. We've had discussion. I would say the BET can, you can anticipate that I have a little follow-up to this retirement. Enough is enough. I think we're going to make some see what we can change for the future going forward. With that, is there any further discussion?
I'm just clarifying, there's no dollar amount, Greg, associated with the motion?
The motion that I put forward has no dollar amount, and it does not have a time limit.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion that moved in second. Mr. Raymer, I would call on you because you have 3 remaining conditions left. Are you still seeking to add those to the motion on the floor?
First of all, I made no application to amend Mr. Bedrosian's motion to add any conditions. I merely, let me finish. I merely reported as a law committee the 5 conditions that were imposed. So there is no motion to amend. The motion before you is the motion before you. I will speak my own personal point of view. The time limitation was never important to me, but the dollar limitation remains important to me. And with the greatest respect for good minds who have served on both the budget, budget committee and on the BET and also on the retirement board, I will nevertheless vote against this investment, but purely because of the absence of a dollar limit imposed. The dollar limit did not have to be 10.3, but the complete absence of any dollar limit is of concern to me.
Got it. Any other Your 3 minutes is up. Mr. Pellegrino.
I'm sorry. I'm going to support the motion as it stands, although I want to be very clear that I think it's way too narrow. I think we should be doing business with PIMCO across the board, and I would hope that Chairman Chadwick would take this as just the first step, and that he would come back to us as soon as possible with an arrangement of doing business with PIMCO across the board.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I should go like this. Okay, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? I'm going to call that 11-1-0. Thank you. Mr. Chadwick, Mr. Simon, thank you. Jean, thank you very, very much. I will have some comments on this in my chairman's remarks when we get to the end. But moving on, item 11, old business, MISA update. Top that one, Joe Ross.
They want naming rights now that you've approved.
I was going to say, if you're looking for your mezzanine, they were talking about it over there. Okay. Well, we're all smiling. That's a start.
It's a start. About a year ago, we stood in front of this committee and the RTM, and to the best of our knowledge, put forth a budget of what we thought the project was going to cost, all in the auditorium, the instructional spaces, everything we knew at the time about the environmental conditions, and we thought that the project all in, including the pre-construction costs and the $100,000 we spent at the beginning, was $36,930,000, so roughly $37 million, and that's where we were a year ago. Since that time, we have slogged through the EPA requirements, the requirements of the Corps of Engineers, and a lot of people that have been asked to look at our project, and we have successfully gotten approval from the EPA and also the BSF, which is the state review agency. We recently received all of those approvals about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. Once we did that, we were, let me just back up. At the time we presented the $36,930 budget, the BET and the RTM, for whatever reasons, and I'm not sure of it, did not approve that amount. They kept a number that was about $3.1 million less than that. Whether that was in front of you at the time, or I don't know the process exactly. But when we presented the $37 million, I think there was an approval from both BET and RTM of about $34 million. I think that those are rough numbers. So we knew we were lacking $3 million, and raised our hand and said, we'll be back. Unfortunately, we thought we would be back for $3 million, and what's happened is that the actual bids, which is the second condition that the BT put on it, is that saying we're not going to release any money till we actually see what the contractors and the bidders say this project is worth. So we went out to bid about 6 weeks ago. Turner Construction is our construction manager. They had successfully done this at Glenville School. They are currently using the same system on Nathaniel Witherell. They have been our construction consultant for about 3 years on the project. We went out to bid, and the way that a construction manager bids is to divide up all of the pieces of work into various trade packages. And what you have in front of you is a spreadsheet, that one. And the spreadsheet shows that we went out to bid in 23 different packages, starting with demolition, abatement, site work, all the ways down to the theater seating. And it's the best way for a construction manager to bid and buy the work by selectively going to bidders, not selectively, but by targeting the trades for people who actually do the work. So these are bids from a plumber that actually does the piping work. It's a bid from the electrician that actually does the electrical work. There's no general contractors. There's no agents involved. These are people that are bona fide contractors. The second item, so we have these 23 trades, and they're listed there. And then we have what Turner had as the budget at that point in time.
Now, Turner's budget was about $22.1 million. That means the trade costs. If you sum all of their plumbing, electrical, etc., it doesn't have the supervision, it doesn't have the soft costs, it doesn't have a lot of things that were in our $37 million that we gave you. So you just have to focus on a portion of that $37 million. So the focus of the $37 million is this $22 million worth of budget. The next two items are the amount of contractors that we anticipated were going to bid the job. Now, this is a public bid, so we don't know how many people are actually going to bid the job, but part of Turner's requirement is to contact various people and try to stir up as much interest as we possibly can. And they thought, for example, on the demolition, that we were going to have responses from 7 bidders. Over the bid and the walkthrough periods, they were getting good vibes and positive responses, not dollars yet, but positive responses from 7 bidders. What happens was, in the next column, we actually received 6 bids. And you can see as you go across the top line what those bids are. So, for example, the first one is the first low bidder. It's $567,000, and it was standard demolition. And the next highest bid is $570,000 from a company called NARAM, $633 from AMEC, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're looking at is a spreadsheet of bids starting from low going to high, and it represents a couple things. First of all, you're looking at the absolute number. How does that compare to our budget? That's an important item. The second thing is how many bidders did we have, indicates what kind of competition there was. Here there was good competition in the demolition abatement. We had 6 bidders. And then the third thing that you look at is the range of bids. And as you go across the sheet, you see that you've got low bids of $567, and they go all the way up to $932. Now, it's not unusual in construction trades to have bids all over the place. And it's a reflection of not just the person's cost, it's a reflection of their margins, what they think they want to make on the job currently, how many other jobs they have. There's a lot of reasons we have fluctuations in construction bids. A lot of times a person will put in a high bid saying, you know what, I have enough work, but if I can get this job for that kind of number, I'll take it. Other times they're trying to make back money that they lost on another job. So there's a whole bunch of reasons that you have spreads in bids. Usually the quantities, how much linear foot of pipe or how much excavation, those are pretty well defined. So it's really in efficiency and markups and what kind of risk somebody wants to take on it. So that's why you see a spread in the bids. As you go down here, you can see that we're considerably over in several trades. And you can see that the aggregate number is $29.2 million. When you take the low bidder of each trade, $567 for the demolition, $2,891,000. I'm reading from the third column or the fourth column there. And you can see that the aggregate number is $29.2 million versus Turner's budget of $22 million. So essentially, we're $7.2 million over what we anticipated the bids to be. The building committee had a slightly higher budget than Turner's. We carry some extra, it's not contingency, it's just extra things in the trade cost. And the reason being is that we bid a series of alternates when we bid, and the alternates are sort of like shock absorbers. So we had 10 deduct alternates and we had 10 add alternates. And a lot of those add alternates we were hoping we would be able to get. And that's why we had a slightly larger construction budget. A trade budget. We also had budgets for soft costs, the insurance, the FF&E. We had other budgets that stacked up all into that $37 million. So this is the bad news, in that when we take this $29.2 million and we looked at all of the shock absorbers that we had, and some of them, most of them that we took were deducts because we're over, and one of them was an ad that we had to take.
So do you have a list for us?
I do not have a list. I could provide you with them.
Thank
But
you.
all of those alternates were competitively bid. So, for example, we had a deduct alternate to change the wall panels, the metal wall panels on the outside of the auditorium from a flat wall panel to a corrugated wall panel. Not what we liked aesthetically. We liked the flat one better. But if you take that deduct alternates, it's close to $180,000. So there's a series of those. They had to do with canopies. They had to do with trim. And the one add alternate that we took was about $190,000 of wetlands requirements that we had anticipated, but we weren't sure what it was going to cost yet. So the committee looked at the 29.2 and said, out of all of the shock absorbers, we can reduce this by $400,000, but that means we're still at $28,800,000 as the anticipated summation of all the bids. If I can ask you to go to the next chart, which is this one. This takes all of the MISA costs and divides it into three phases. Phase one is the pre-construction and the site work that we did. Phase two is all of the costs just for the auditorium. And phase three is all of the costs for the instructional space. And if you go across under 4A, where you see the construction costs, that's where you'll see the $28.8 million, which is summation of the bids minus $400,000 worth of shock absorbers. And if you keep going down that list of all of the things that yet compose the total scope of the job, you can see that the total becomes $42.42 million. Big number. We presented this the other night to the Board of Ed, who's essentially our client, just like the rest of the town is our client. And Turner presented the bids, and Turner's take on why these bids are where they are is predominantly market condition. What they had said, and we have asked them every year and every 6 months to say, what do we think escalation is? What do we think cost will be? And their report at the Board of Ed meeting and their report to the building committee is that there's been an inordinate amount of cost being added to the bids for the reasons that we talked about. There's a lot of work currently out in the state of Connecticut, University of Connecticut, 2 other high schools, some other schools, so that the amount of volume that's out there to bid is larger. And also it was their feeling that at this point in time, the contractors who have worked on very low margins over the last 3 or 4 years are now starting to increase their margins and trying to get back to where they are. Now, whether that'll stick or not is a question, and that was one of the things we asked them. And their feeling is that because of the volume and because of the limited amount of people that could handle those intermediate-sized jobs, they felt that, these prices are going to stick. Doesn't mean they wouldn't commit that if I bid this job a year from now, that it wouldn't be the same or less, but their intuition is that the numbers are going to continue to increase. So we saw a large spike in 5 or 6 trades here that lead us to believe that the number is correct at 28.8. However, there was a couple things that I wanted to point out that worry us. If you go to line 3, which is the cast-in-place concrete, you can see that Turner had a budget of $1,630,000, and the bid for that is $2,760,000, so it's considerably over. But the thing that bothers us is out of 6 anticipated bids, we only had 1. So for some reason, this trade is very non-competitive, and I think the building committee feels that it has to rebid that line to get more competition. The other thing is the line right above it, the site work, which is $1,681,000, and the low bidder is $2,891,000. We were worried about the site work because of the environmental conditions. This line includes the removal of contaminated fills, and includes dewatering, etc. But the real worry here, I'm worried because it's $1,300,000 over, but if you look at the other bids, as you go across that line, you see that the next lowest bidder is $6,900,000, and then another bidder is $7,500,000, and the next highest bidder is $8,400,000. These are crazy numbers, and we feel that the crazy numbers are because they're very frightened of the site, so that we're getting some people we're getting all of the bidders that are putting in a factor because of the environmental conditions on the site, and we're seeing some people that are putting in extremely large numbers. Now, this is only the one trade that we feel is impacted by the site. The rest of them, whether a guy's doing masonry or roofing or plaster, really, once the building's enclosed and once the excavation is done, he shouldn't put any risk factor in for any of the environmental. So we're worried about, we don't have competition on cast-in-place concrete, but we're very worried about the spread that our site work bidders are telling us that's out there. All right.
I'm sorry. Joe, just a quick question, Mr. Chairman, if I can. You said maybe you'd put out to bid the cast-in-place concrete. Is there a danger that the one guy is going to say, wow, I was the only one who bid, I must have been very low? Would he come back even higher?
He might. That's true of any of these numbers.
I mean, if I remember, there was maybe an issue with Nathaniel Witherall that happened. I mean, they went out to rebid,
Yes.
and everybody went up in price.
Yeah, I guess unofficially I would contact the 5 other bidders that we thought we were going to bid and find out why they didn't bid. If they're very busy, then I understand it. If it's they didn't have enough time for some reason, and I would try to get an idea and not subvert the public process in any way of what kind of competition we could do. So I think, yes, you have that possibility. You also have the reverse possibility. Somebody didn't bid and says, hell, I could have done that I could have named that tune in 2.3. I'm going to bid this job if you're going to rebid it, because they already know where the current bids are. So it could go both ways, but you definitely have a risk factor in doing this.
Another quick question, the 5% building contingency and the 3% project contingency, are you still comfortable with those percentages?
You see those on this chart? In other words,
5%.
if you look at the chart, you can just use the totals. Maybe that's the easiest thing. You can see that on pre-construction is $2,130,000. The site work is $2,040,000, and the Phase 1 environmental costs are $1,750,000. Those are pretty much done and paid for already. So there's very little. There's no risk or no contingency that you'd put on the first 3 items. Okay. And the contingency that we put on the construction is on the construction cost, which is item 4, and that is 5%. And then we put a 3% contingency, which is an owner's contingency, for the items 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, I think as a building committee, we're okay with 5% and 3%. However, the only factor that's still a big risk factor is how the site work may influence the site work bid, and there we may want to consider something else on that particular item.
Okay.
The net result of this, and I'll just continue my story, is that we're $42.42 billion, which is $5.4 million over our $37 million. So we came to the Board of Ed with some additional value engineering, not our shock absorbers, but additional. How can we get down? And we came with 3 main items. Item number 1 is that the orchestra pit has become very, very expensive. And the reason it's become very expensive is it's the source of a lot of contaminated fill, and even more importantly, it's the source of a lot of the worry about contaminated groundwater coming in. It's the lowest point of excavation. The concern from the EPA and a lot of people is that we will drag down the existing water table towards this low point, and in doing so, we will bring existing water, perched water, the water in the bowl, you heard all of those things the other night, that will start dragging that across and cross-contaminating a lot of the other soils that are there. So the elevator, the lift and the pit for the lift, we thought in this current condition with the dewatering and everything else is worth about $1.1 million. So we offered to the Board of Ed a further, a way to get down on some of this $5.4 million. And the second thing we offered was to reduce the seating. And that was a question of what's mandated and what's not. If you remember, the design as given in the ed spec is 1,325 seats, which meant 50% of the student population, and that's where that number came from. But the way the building is designed, there's an orchestra level, there's a mezzanine, and there's a balcony. And there is a cost savings of not building the balcony. It's about $600,000. And so we offered that to them. The last item we offered was to try to, the original ed spec said demolish the existing auditorium, build a new auditorium, and build a new educational instruction space. We looked at reusing the auditorium a long, long time ago, and it really wasn't suitable for the new auditorium. And when we looked at it for the instructional space, it wasn't ideal. But when you're looking for dollars, one of the things that we thought would be is to not demolish the existing auditorium and to reuse the existing auditorium for the instructional spaces. Band, orchestra, electronic music, some of the portions of the choral. And we hadn't done that originally, but because of where we are, we said, let's take a shot at it. And what you see in these two drawings are very preliminary attempts by the architect. He only had 2 days to do it, of saying, and if you want to look at this one, that's a good one to look at, not the blue one, but this one. This is a way of taking all of the orchestra and the electronic music and fitting it into the space of the existing auditorium. And the blue one does the same, it's the same idea. How do we put it in? So we're currently studying this. The Board of Ed has asked us to look at this option. They have asked us for a price on how much this would save, and we're working on that right now with Turner. So we presented all of this the other night to the Board of Ed and asked for direction, and unfortunately did not get any. And we can understand why, because they're looking for additional information from us. But we're here today because there's, I guess, a motion in front of you for coming up to the 36,930. I think that's the 3,115,000 that's in front of you today. So before that motion was voted on and before there was further discussion, we felt that we had an obligation to present to you where we are with our bids.
First of all, your commitment to this is second to none.
Thank you. Now, if we can get the results the same way, we would have been all set.
That's I feel that challenge. Why we have the building committee chairman here? Do we have any questions for the building committee chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Norton.
Hi, Joe. I don't envy the situation you're in. We're facing somewhat similar situation with where I'm also on that building committee, but I want to talk about bonding. I presume for all these 23 general contractors, you've got bid bonds.
On the trade contractors, yeah, they're not general contractors. The answer is yes, and I'm worried about a couple of them because the price of a bid bond versus somebody reneging on me when you see a bid of $2 million versus $7 million, I'm worried about, and we've asked for to approach 2 or 3 of these to make sure that we understand it. But yes,
That's exactly
we did.
my question.
The answer is yes, we did accept, we made it mandatory to take bid bonds on all of these.
I think I'm hearing you state that you have some concerns about the performance bonds if the bids are approved. So that taking it to the next step from the bid bond to the performance bond, which is what you're going to need if we go forward with this project. I think what I'm hearing you state is you have some concerns about some of them about being able to secure the performance bonds.
That is correct. That's a concern. We looked at it. Whenever you see a bid spread like this, you're worried that the bid bond just does a little bit for you of making the guy take it. But where do we go? Now, Turner has sat down with the site work guys and tried to convince the low person that they are correct, and has tried to convince the high people that they are incorrect. We are making some progress, but that is a concern, yes.
Because on the site work is the one on which I'm really focusing on, because your range is $5 million.
Big time.
So that is the bid bond valid?
We're looking at that right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Goldrick?
Yeah, Mr. Ross, could you just help me on the math again here. How many seats do we have in the current auditorium? We're going to 1347 with the original plan, right?
1325.
1325.
Those are fixed seats. You always have an ability in some of the areas of putting some movable seats in, but
And
it's
how many-
designed for 1325.
How many is it today?
Yeah, 860.
So you're talking about taking out, what, about a quarter of the increase in seats that we had planned if you get rid of that balcony, right?
Let's see, 1325 minus 860 is what?
Removing 189 seats.
Right, about a third of the.
So the balcony is 189 seats.
The balcony is 189 seats.
So by taking out $600,000, which is, what, tiny fraction of the cost, we're taking out, a major percentage of the increase that we were looking to do to begin with.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
correct?
We were looking for large deducts. We weren't looking for, take the molding off the door, and we came up with these three. But you are correct, and that's why I mentioned it sort of set us in the wrong direction of why we were going ahead with this in the beginning, and that was to get a 50% of the population of the school.
Mr. Johnson?
Oh, it didn't go. The 1.1 million for removing the orchestra pit, as you say, that's a lot of the site work concern probably. Would that potentially be a greater saving when you went to go rebid that site work or demolition, site work number?
I don't know. The 1.1 was arrived at by Turner. There is a separate little sheet on that, I forgot to point it out, which is this sheet, where they did the evaluation, and it affects various trades, and it's
I mean, given the Amex bid being 1.2 million over what they thought it would be, potentially get some more rebidding anyway for the site work, so maybe that'll...
It could certainly ease people's minds. If what Art's concern is, and it's my concern is too, if we lose the low bidder, it would certainly make it easier if we didn't have the orchestra pit because of the dewatering, et cetera, to attract more bidders. The other thing we could do, which we were looking at, is not to put the excavator at risk, but to make qualifications on how many yards of contamination he's taken out and by unit price, so that if we thought that they were overloading the risk, then maybe we would take the risk, but we would want to do it with some kind of analysis of that. But certainly the orchestra pit is a big risk because of the underground, the water that they see coming in. And that was a big thing for the EPA also.
Mr. Finger?
Joe, several questions. You were indicating these option 1 and option 2 on utilizing the building envelope of the existing auditorium for the instructional space, correct?
Correct.
So these are rough sketches. You haven't received, or have you received any guidance from the Board of Ed as to whether that would be acceptable to them?
The guidance that we received was that please tell us how this differs from the ed spec. They understood what we were trying to do, but they would like to know that the electronic music, for example, section has the same number of seats for students, or that the lab area or the recording studio is the same, how many square feet. Same thing with the band, how many square foot did we end up with when we did it this way. So the architect is in the process right now of trying to do that. So the Board of Ed is saying, tell me how it works compared to what the ed spec. But the ed spec was based upon efficiencies and adjacencies of a new build.
So how long do you think it would take the architect to get an answer for the Board of Ed with regard to what the variations, if any, would be? And second part of that is, once they arrive at whatever that configuration would be in that building, what the cost savings would be versus what you currently have. How long do you think it would take to have the architect do his work and to get a good idea of what the cost differential would be?
It's actually, they're doing the comparison of the square footages and the adjacencies now. We hope to have it, I hope by the end of this week, beginning of next week. Once we understand that, then Turner will take some of these details and pricing, and we thought about 3 weeks to have whatever the cost savings is.
Okay.
But I can tell you the cost savings is not going to be the whole delta.
No, that would be nice, but I would not expect it would be. Another
Okay,
question
go
I have is, with regard to the site work cost, which is what, understandably gives you trouble because of the differential between the low bid and the other bidders.
Sure.
At what point would you feel comfortable that this low bid is a firm low bid, and you're confident that that contractor can and will perform to that price?
We've already reviewed the scope. Turner has. We need to talk to their bonding company, and we want to make sure, we'd like another meeting with the environmental consultants and them to make sure they understood the frac tanks and the dewatering and everything else. So that's going on in this week.
So do you think that would all be resolved this week?
By next week, yes.
By next week?
Yes.
So between the reconfiguration or the reutilizing the existing envelope of the auditorium and vetting out this issue on the site work contractor, both of those combined, you're talking, well, the auditorium one would be the controlling time frame, 3 to 4 weeks, is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If I may just add on to one of Bill's questions, if using I'll call it the old auditorium, and redesigning and using that for musical instruction space, what would the impacts be to that, to your land use approvals, your State Board of Education approvals, your floor area ratio approvals, all of that?
We're close, but we would have to go back. For example, the existing auditorium is a few thousand square foot larger than what we had planned to build the instructional space. Now, that's good as far as the instructional space is, because it sort of means I could meet all the requirements, but it's bad as far as FAR. So we would have to go back and see what kind of difference there would be in it. And we could then either modify the existing auditorium by taking a small section out of it to be consistent, or if staff at Planning and Zoning thought it was close enough, then maybe we could get it to go along with it. In wetlands, we already know what we have to do. They're not concerned with what's in the shell. They're concerned what's on the back parking lot in that area, so they have no concern about this. Architectural Review Board, we would go back because they were expecting a new building in front, but if I'm reusing the existing building, I guess I've got a pretty good argument about it was acceptable, so why isn't it acceptable now? So in the building department, we were in the middle of getting a building permit, and we're pretty close to it. I think we would get the building permit and then file for an amendment. With BSF, we would do the same thing. We're already approved the way it is, but with any of our schools, as we go along, we modify that at the end for a reimbursement by amendment. I don't know if I covered it all.
Okay, so Mr. Pellegrino?
Joe, I've been listening tonight to what you've shared with us, and if I can share with you what I'm inferring from your comments, and correct me if I'm wrong, I take away that we simply have very few good choices here. If you're telling me the only two real ideas that you can come up with are do away with the orchestra pit and essentially eliminate over 25% of the increased seating, that's your best. If that's our best ideas, it tells me that we've got very few good choices. It's the only thing I can infer. So let me go to another question. What is your timing? Give me your best sense of timing of where we go from here, because I see two issues that I think have to be resolved by the Board of Education. The first one is, do they or do they not want, do you or do you not want us to have the $3.1 million voted on Thursday? I'll give you both the questions. Okay, I see you're prepared for that. I appreciate that. I don't know what you want to do there. The other question is what do you ultimately want to do in terms of rebidding this, your strategy, and timing for that. Those seem to me to be the two big issues.
Right. If in fact we're going to take these large deduct ultimates that affect the EdSpec program, whether it's the orchestra pit or the balcony, and if in fact we're going to take this redesign, then we're going to have to rebid most of these trades. because I couldn't come up with the numbers that you would allow me to release. Another way is, if you had a larger approval number, I could award all the contracts at a higher and then negotiate those down by the alteration or the pit removal. So I'm sort of caught between a rock and a hard place because I can't sign the contracts because I only have $34 million or whatever the equivalent is. So I can't award the contracts and negotiate them. So my only method forward would be to rebid these. And that may open up whoever's questioned Pandora's box, or it may not. It may help me in some cases or it may hurt me.
Right, but I think the question goes back to the school board. Do they want us to go forward with a $42 million project?
First of all, let me just, I'm sorry before. Dr. McCursey, school board members, I really appreciate all of you being here tonight. And, you know, I sincerely, I didn't recognize you before, and I'm sorry for that. And, you know, we're working on this one together. I can see this coming.
So, clearly, this is an important project to us. We have a lot of school board members here and the administration. We first discussed this and only discussed this last Thursday night, so we don't have a lot of answers for you tonight. I can tell you that our board is, we're trying to work through these issues, and we'll have a request for you before you have to vote on Thursday night. We don't have that tonight. The alternatives to us are just like you heard them. We have an ability to, we had an ed spec, which we had received a budget for. It was within what we, together with the BET and the RTM, felt was supportable by town bodies. But now we have different information. And the Board of Ed has to make some choices here, has to look to see whether it makes sense to continue on the path of the full ed scope. Ed specs, does it make sense to make changes? And we need more information to do that. What we asked the building committee to provide for us and our administration to provide for us as a result of last Thursday's meetings were three things. For each of the three alternatives identified by the building committee, we asked for the cost estimate and then the pros and cons operationally for making that change. What's could be the benefit, and maybe it's just cost, but what would be the problems of changing that ed spec to remove that feature of the space? We also asked for the administration to do a very high-level cash flow look at Board of Ed operating and capital budgets going forward as we currently know them. We know we have a digital learning initiative. I can tell you that the numbers presented by the consultant are not numbers supported by our Board of Ed thus far. We're going to be discussing that. That's on our agenda for our Thursday night meeting, so we're not able to come to your vote.
Would you like to switch? It would be more easy. It would probably be easier for us to do your meeting.
So we have to, understand what that might look like and how important that is to us. We want to try and do a pro forma of operating budgets and what contract negotiations and other changes within our operation could look like, and our capital budget, where those exist right now and what that looks like. So we get a handle on total cost for the Board of Ed because we know that's a concern of yours, but it's a concern of ours as well. We're going to look at those features, both those pieces of information, and we have our plan is to make some decisions regarding MISA. It's going to take the 3 weeks to get that information from the building committee. Regarding the appropriation on Thursday night, what we'll tell you is there are three ways to go, right? Leave it in, take it out, or increase it. And by Thursday night, hopefully, we are committed to giving you our recommendation for what you should do with that number. I don't have that information for you right now.
Appreciate it.
I would just comment on that. Those three options, pulling it out, I would never want to speak for the board. But I sense that 3.1, and I'll go on record, I would say this board knew about that going back at the time the RTM was approving the budget. That was your roof redesign from the water. So I was never really, I wasn't super concerned about that. I'm not 100% sure all the RTM committees and districts are quite aware what builds up that 3.1. By leaving it in sets the stage still for an interim, for unless you can actually, find your way to engineer this down to the 37. So then you have a double process of having to go through that, hey, the 3.1, what's that, and what else is coming, and that has its own challenges. Pulling it out, I don't see that as a challenge. I think, again, I'm not speaking for this board, but I think we were fairly, from what I could see in the Budget Committee and what I see in communications, I think that putting it back in that first 3.1 on an interim basis, that wasn't a challenge that I have. Raising the appropriation, the challenge we have with that is that, in essence, the questions are still on the table, and I think, I really think the Board of Ed has probably got more challenges in front of it than it's had in a long time. I think, you spoke of the digital learning. We speak of town budgets, and I want to make sure that, in my opinion, if I were on the Board of Ed, I would want to make sure that everything we're doing certainly maintains what I consider the very generous approach to education in the town, that we're not doing anything where the legislative body, this body's probably very well versed, although we don't know that much about the digital learning yet, but I'm sure we're all willing to learn together. But I think going forward, we're looking at, and I'll go on the record saying this, I think the challenge that you have is between the digital learning, the annual capital, the annual operating budgets, and being able to say, what are we to the town over a 5-year period? And if we don't do that, I would say that from what I gather in my brief encounters with different RTM people, you might want to have a plan for if you don't get not only the 3.1, but if you don't get anything else. I think that's also something that you have to have as an option before you. I think people are going to say, what happens if we just say, look, 37's not we, I'm not speaking for this board, but what happens if a conclusion comes out of the RTM where, look, 37 is where we're at, or 34 is what we're at? What is your alternative to that scenario as well? I could say from our point of view, the timing, I see a challenge because I see you talking about 30 to 60 days for a real package with all of these answers to your different options and everything. Still could be a challenge getting that before the RTM on an interim basis, even in June. It would be very difficult to try to roll an interim into the budget night. I
want to make two comments on what you're saying. First of all, if the Board of Ed says for the moment, don't include the additional 3.11 in this budget, and I don't know if the board is at that position, but it's not because we're not supporting the project. We only want to go to the RTM once. We want to talk about the project in total, make the commitment of this is what it is, so we just need to figure out the right timing for that. The rock and the hard place that we're between is, the project is not so easily split apart into pieces. There are many different agencies and factors that have caused the building to be designed the way it is. You've got building codes and fire codes and requirements from wetlands and requirements from zoning, requirements from the building department at the state, and it all pieces together to come to this total. You can't pull at one without impacting another. We also now have a set of bids. We've heard from the construction manager the bidding environment is such that bids most likely are going to increase. So if you don't exercise these bids, there is a real possibility that the project cost gets higher, which means to fit within a budget, you're going to have to remove more features of the auditorium. So you're working against yourself. The bids are good until July 7th. We have to get some path that we can get approval on in May or June, or I think that we're back to a redesign of a significantly lesser project scope, and we've had support at this project scope, so that's not a great alternative. I want a vote on this project scope based on what the Board of Ed would suggest to modify, if anything. So the time is short. I don't see the 60 days. I see it shorter. I'm hoping the Board of Ed in April can do it, and maybe there is a mechanism to allow the TM to have the discussion when it's discussing the entire budget about what the Board of Ed's recommending. Either they can vote that night or maybe they can't. But the building committee is at a difficult process. They've got existing bids. They expire July 7th, I believe is the date. It takes some time to execute and get going. So a May decision on this is a whole lot better than even a June decision. But going beyond that, I think we're talking about very different scenario.
I'm about to get advice. Roland?
The charter, I believe, says that the BT shall deliver a budget to the RTM on or about May 1st. So we'll find out tomorrow from the law department, but I'm thinking that the decision to whether to pull the 3, leave the 3, or make the 3 9, if that could be done in April and still be part of the proposed budget that's sent on to the RTM. I don't know if that's an option that somebody wants to consider.
If it wasn't bad enough with the
So, let me-
retirement, how do I handle that one?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a roll?
Yes.
So just procedurally, that means that this is March. We would have to make a decision in April, and we would, as a board, take a vote on that item to amend?
To amend the budget.
To amend the budget presented to the RTM?
I look forward to that conversation tomorrow. That one, wow. Okay. Mr. Fink, I'm sorry. Okay, time out, let me write this down. Mr. Goldrick, Mr. Fink.
Right, if I've got this right, about $4.5 million of the increase is in building materials. You've got concrete, steel, masonry. Those are basically, and those are commodities. You know, I'm guessing there's just some margin to that. And looking at the other bids, they're pretty close on these. So it would seem to me that you're talking about eliminating value of the project as a whole, and yet it's a huge diminution of the auditorium itself in terms of usage. I don't see much really room this evening. We saw about the bids for the pier that came in substantially higher than we expected. If you look at our 8 months of year-on-year increase bids with the substantial difference between the low bid and the second, means that these guys could come back and tack on a good deal more. So it seems to me that this is probably what was going on half a century ago, with another Board of Ed, another BET, having the tail wag the dog, saying, well, all right, we wanted this auditorium, and this is the amount, but then it kept going up, so they kept knocking it back down, so that, 10 years ago, people said, we've got a lousy auditorium, we need to replace it. And here we are again, trying to knock it back into something inferior. Got a lot of schools around here. Wilton, with a third of the population, has a beautiful auditorium that they built just a few years ago. Or build a bunch of new schools. We're just going to have to bite the bullet that has been put together by the building committee.
Okay.
But in terms of, we spend actually a smaller proportion of per capita income on average in our community on education.
Other towns. Mr. Finger was next.
Joe, the way the process works, as you know, in the town, we're scheduled to approve a budget on Thursday. That budget would then start its process, start its way towards the RTM, which ultimately in May will approve a budget. At what point do you have sufficient, do you and the bidders have sufficient comfort that there is an appropriation or will be an appropriation to allow you to begin to have negotiations, if you will, with some of these contractors on scaling back, if that's what you want to do, giving them the comfort that this project's going to go forward, but also giving you the ability to begin to negotiate with them? Do you need to wait until the RTM approves the project? Or if we approve something, does that give you the ability to go and speak with them?
I believe that we could talk to them now, but we would have to talk to most of the bidders. We can't, because they're not awarded the contract yet. I think we would have to have the same discussions with the bidder, so we wouldn't get a protest from another bidder, which we can do with Turner. So we could do that over the next couple of weeks, but we cannot award a contract
until you have the full
until we have the sufficient funds.
But if you were to decide, if the Board of Ed would decide to pull the 3.1 for the time being, and I'm not suggesting that you do that, but if you were to do that, so the only appropriation that would be on the call for this body to approve would be, for a lesser number, would be not even a 37, would be let's call it a $34 million number.
My understanding, you wouldn't have to prove anything. You already approved that.
Right. So what happens then? You've gone out to bid and you only have you got bids for $42 million, you only have $34 million, and at least to the outside world's eyes, the prospect of only $34 million, because there's no other money that's in the pipeline, if you will, for this project.
The only radical thing that you could do is, because if you look at the 4 columns again, you've already spent $6 million on the site work and whatever, and the auditorium is 29, so if you add those two together, it's $35 million. I would have to come up with another $1 million, either orchestra pit or something else, and only build the auditorium without any instructional
So
space.
what happens to all the bids you have in hand?
I'd have to...
Would you have to rebid?
I think so, because those alternates it was never split up like that. But, so I think you would probably have to rebid it.
Alternatively, if the full $8 million was in front of this board, and we voted on that on Thursday, and indulge me, please, and assume we approve that with a number of conditions, whatever those conditions might be, would that give you a better opportunity to then spend that 3 to 4 weeks to do the work that the architects need to do and Turner on the pricing, give you ample time to go and you or Turner to meet with or speak with the various contractors who bid, so that in a month's time, knowing that the BET, in my scenario, has approved a $42 million project, to be able to come back to us, let's say in April, and say, we've done this, we've done that, and that number maybe is not 42 million, it's 40 million. Now, we've already approved a budget. We could either do what Roland suggested, maybe, is amend that, or there could be a discussion at the RTM level that you only need 40 million. Does that help you?
You could theoretically award all of the contracts that are listed here. If you get away from the problem with the site work and whatever, you could award, and you could simultaneously negotiate deduct alternates for $2 million if we knew which $2 million was acceptable. And you could put that, I guess you could put that as a condition, saying we're approving 42, but we want you to come in at 40 by negotiating alternates. That would save me from rebidding these.
No, we could approve 42 with conditions that before you actually award the contract or allow somebody to start work, you need to come back and tell us what your actual scope is, how it's been changed, where the pricing adjustments may or may not be.
No, I have to award the contract first, but I could present to you the deduct alternates that they've agreed to, but I can't exercise those deduct alternates till after the contract is signed. That's to avoid the only way to avoid rebidding is to award based upon the scope.
But you can't award I think
until you have $42 million authorized.
And that would be an RTM authorization,
That's
not
correct.
a BT.
Does it need BET release of conditions too?
Well, secondly would be the actual cash, the release of conditions, but the only way to award would be to have the appropriation, have everything match the 42 million, and then a subsequently set of deducts that would be somehow subject to your review. But I don't know how, unless I do that, then I have to rebid this. Now, maybe you don't rebid all of the trades. That's one of the things. Maybe we try to keep some of them in line. So that's a
Well,
possibility.
Joe, that's what they did for Nathaniel Witherell. They locked in the ones they wanted to lock in, and they rebid the others.
Right. For example, I think we have very low electrical number and a very low HVAC number. I have a very high plumbing number. So, I mean, there's 3 or 4 of these that I would love to lock in, but when I add that to the other bids, I don't have enough to do it. So, yes, there could be a strategy like that, and we could develop that strategy, but I'm not sure I'm not sure what I could save or not save until they had the full appropriation.
Mr. Chairman, may I? So I want to share with you my observations. I think trying to eliminate the balcony is a non-starter. I think that's a waste of time. For $600,000 to eliminate that number of seats on a price per seat basis, it doesn't make any sense at all. I think the only option that you really have is whether or not you do or don't need the orchestra pit, and I'm not qualified to say that. I think you as a school board need to think about what that does or doesn't do for performances. And remember, the useful life of this facility is 40 years. A lot of performances in 40 years. What do you want to do? That's the key point, I think, that you have to decide. The thought of going back into the existing auditorium and reworking all this space and coming up with new designs and engineering and approvals, you may as well, how many pretzels are you going to turn yourself into? I don't get that. I think you need to take some time, think it through strategically, because in truth, we have to look at this, and I think the citizens will look at this in its total complexity. It's not just the auditorium. It's your operating budget. It's your pipeline of capital budgets that's $10 million, and we know how much we struggled this past year about that. It's your digital learning program, which could be as much as $20 million. You still have to resolve the racial imbalance issue. You still have to resolve utilization of your facilities issue. You have 7 issues on the table, 7. They all have financial ramifications. If there's one thing I want you to take away, you say what you want, but I think we've worked very well with you this past year because we've been very candid about these issues. You've worked very well with us. But if we're going to keep that working together, you can't just take one issue, pick it off, and say, thank you very much, I've got that in my cover, now I'll go fight the next battle. You need to start taking a holistic approach to what you're doing as a board in providing the best education possible in this country to our pupils. And you need to get a handle on that. And you need to come together with a strategy, a thought process, and a game plan that says, this is important here, this is important here, this is important here, and all together, we know that this is what the cost in this package is. Because our role is to help finance and strategize the financing structure of how we tax and how we do things as well as possibly from a finance point of view. Your role is to decide the entire package and what you want in terms of promoting the finest education program possible for our students. That's how I feel about this.
Can I respond? I will agree that we've worked well together and that we've had good conversations about what's important. I just want to make sure that it is on the record that the Board of Ed has been very upfront about the issues facing us. We have had all year long our agendas and our meetings have been focused around all of these key issues facing us. There is a lot going on in education. Education doesn't stand still. It constantly changes. And if we talk about just funding it on a maintenance level, we're not going to do justice for the kids. We can't, even organizationally, what we do, we want to be able to do very well. So you can't tackle all these problems simultaneously. We can't spread our management that thin. We have to prioritize, and we have to focus on the big ones. But and that's a conversation our board has had and will continue to have, and we will prioritize. But at the end of the day, we may still differ on how many things that we think we can accomplish well. Okay.
I must say, thank you. I must say that we're here with this project because it wasn't done right originally, and it wasn't done right again. And this is the time, it seems to me, that as a matter of what we're investing for the town and what we're doing, it's very important that you give consideration to what is the right project going forward.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.
Meeting. I'm sorry. Thank you, Joe. Full BET meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the February 19th.
Moved by Mr. Finger, second by Ms. Tarkenton. Discussion? All those in favor?
One abstention.
Sorry, thank you. The abstention is Mr. Norton. Okay, next one. February 26th, BET special meeting. Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And I think, Mr. Bedrosian, you might want to, I have you not there. You might want to abstain on that one.
Abstained.
Okay. I'm just suggesting it. Okay. Everybody who's leaving, just give us some quiet there. Let's see. Next item is March 5th, BET special meeting.
I'll move that we accept the minutes of the March 5th meeting.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Kiernan. And all those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining. Okay. 10-01. That takes our minutes. Mr. Norton.
No report.
11-0. I'm sorry, it was 11-01. I'm sorry. I just got, boy, double header. I get whacked. Okay. Ms. Kiernan?
No report.
This month, obviously, a couple things. Real quick, everybody noticed I sent out a schedule, kind of an outline schedule for our RTM committee and district meetings. Everybody should have gotten that. Here's what I would say. I tried to keep it balanced. I'm looking at certain committees with the obligations I think they're going to have. If you can't make one of those, just let me know, or possibly find a substitute. But I was hoping we get some really good coverage on that for the next two meetings. I think the April might be kind of quick for those of you, if you remember last year. April's usually kind of quick. May is a full event. Nathaniel Witherell, First Selectman's not here. They got their building permit for some of their outdoor. They're off and running. They had been having. Yeah,
they didn't have it as at 4 o'clock.
No, I believe they have it. They had to agree to some conditions, so I believe that project's off and running. I will check on it, but I'm pretty sure I saw the correspondence the other day.
Yeah, but Mike, there was an email that was issued in which it was stated that Bill Maher had not issued it. They had received the information they needed from the sewer department on satisfying the special conditions, but I believe
there's a follow-up email to that. Okay. The retirement board. As I sit here and as I've watched our discussions for 10 years, and I've never been the liaison or on the investment committee, so I'm probably not speaking from a fully educated position on this, but I would say this. The retirement board, the last time any charter was addressed towards the retirement board was 1961. I think you heard Joe Pellegrino say today that retirement strategy and investment and technology and communication, things have changed. I have asked prior to this for a white paper. I believe we've all seen the impacts of the retirement system as the economy goes down, what it's forcing us to look at and the pressures we feel in the budget. We need to stop crying over symptoms as a board and address the remedy. If it's a charter change, I don't know what the solution is, but we need to do that. It has become more and more of a priority, and I feel I don't have the answers to that yet, but I cannot see anything as a bigger item to this board right now than getting this retirement and under control in this situation. And as I've said, when we had our meeting where we were approving the assumptions from the actuary that night, I think that night was an example where I think I put two different options on the table. And to now I think I even have more options that I think we should look at. But I think we need to do that. I also would expect a special meeting of the BET shortly. Today was not one of my favorite days as chairman. I saw what I would consider unacceptable communications, and I think we need to have, if nothing else, a work session to see how we're going to improve that going forward. And I mean that with all sincerity. And I think we are in a position where we are super high achieving board, and we have a lot of things in front of us, and that I would not like to see that happening. I think when we get employees in the middle of certain things, I think that's even makes it worse. And I'll be more than ready for that conversation when it happens. But that's all I have as a chairman's report tonight. Get ready, the budget season, tomorrow night's public hearing, Thursday night's decision night. Any communication that we get from the Board of Ed, obviously, we're going to try and share it as quickly as we can on what they'd like us to do. So with that, Mr. Brady, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Both meetings are here, 7 o'clock tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Thursday night?
Yes.
Thank you.
Moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Leslie?